This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I'm going to use my experience from working as a nurse for 44 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to ask the questions that might come up while listening to the podcast. We both believe that the more you know in advance, the better prepared you will be to make smart choices about end-of-life decisions for yourself or others.
So please relax and get yourself something to eat and drink, because things always are better if you're eating and drinking. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, Charlie reports about African-American funeral customs and has our recipe of the week. In the second and third half, we continue our interview series that I did over the past 2 years with Stevan about idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and lung transplants. This show is dedicated to Stevan, who died in Moorhead, Minnesota 4 months ago. So what's new, Charles?
There were a few days when it wasn't in the 90s here. That's about the only thing. But we're back in the 90s now. So.
Well, as always, we have you beat.
That's true.
Still in the hundreds.
Yes.
Hey, did I hear they're going to be putting a White Castle back in Manhattan?
Yes. Drum roll, please.
Oh.
Where's Ringo?
Wait.
There we are.
It's a cowbell moment.
Yes. Old Bossy is looking forward to that. Yes.
Looking forward to being a White Castle. Yeah. That's one of my life goals.
Oh dear. So let's do the time warp again. Oh look, there we are. The reference to Rocky Horror Picture Show. Jeez, those gray cells are leaving sooner than I thought. Yes, years ago, I don't know how this happened. You know, a White Castle was like demolished. I don't know, to put up some high-rise real estate multi-million-dollar thing. You know, instead of keeping the White Castle.
Imagine.
I know. You know, it's not the New York of my youth. But now there's this big billboard it's great, on a major artery in 34th Street in Manhattan, announcing a new White Castle is opening up very soon. So yes, I'm looking forward to that.
Are you going and watching it get built and saying novenas and stuff?
Yeah, the police asked me to please move along. Yes, so very excited. Don't have to go up to Harlem anymore or down into Brooklyn. I will be able just to stay in Manhattan and have 2 or 3 of those bad boys. Yes.
I do love those.
Yes. So with that, we are going to be sharing with you a new series about funeral rituals and customs from around the world, which, of course, will include funeral food.
Of course.
Remember, we are talking in generalities. So if you are from one of the groups we talk about and say, oh, we don't do that, we know there's a lot of variability in how people do things at a funeral. Check out our resource section for information on the book by Lisa Broget titled Death Warmed Over. We start this week with African Americans. When slavery was established in the 17th century, funerals were important events in the lives of the enslaved, because those were truly one of the only tastes of freedom experienced. Not only was the ceremony often a dawn to dusk affair, but often 2 funerals were held. The first shortly after the death, and the second weeks later when all surviving family members could travel to the grave, as well as an itinerant Black preacher whose work might consist solely of traveling from funeral to funeral. In some cases, funerals were held only at night, to give the enslaved on nearby plantations a chance to sneak away for the service. These dead were often buried with their favorite foods to sustain them for the long journey to the afterlife. According to another tradition, After the grave had been filled in and smoothed over, family members laid plates and utensils on top. Occasionally, broken dishes and bowls were placed on the grave to symbolize the body of a man, woman, or child who had been broken by enslavement. A chicken sacrifice was a common part of what was referred to as a slave funeral, not only to provide food, but also the innards were thought to ward off bad spirits. After a meal, the surviving relatives would take the gizzards and guts into the house and set them by the chimney so that the bad spirits couldn't get in through the fireplace. Our funeral lunch recipe for this week is smothered chicken, which is a staple in Southern soul food cuisine. Whether you call it smothered chicken, chicken smothered with gravy, or gravy chicken, it's a dish that will always bring back memories for those who grew up eating it in the South. So please go to our webpage for that recipe and additional resources for this program. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. We are working with a company called Haibu, and we really need your feedback and evaluation. Please take a minute and go to our show notes for the link to this. Additionally, as a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on your kindness and always appreciate your donations, which are tax deductible. If you find this podcast to be of help to you, which many of you have said it is, please go to our webpage to donate so that we can continue to provide quality shows about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement at www.everyonedies.org. Marianne?
So for our second and third half this week, we have an interview with Stevan Lemke, who was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And if you don't know what that is, there are links in the show notes to previous shows we've done about that. And he had a double lung transplant about 7 years ago. Stevan spent a lot of his time helping other people learn about and cope with IPF. He was very open to talking about IPF, and in this interview, he talks about what was involved in coming home and living after a lung transplant. Fortunately, Stevan died at age 69 on March 26, 2022.
Today, what is this? I think it's the third interview with Stevan Lemke, and let me catch you up if you haven't listened to the first two. And after I catch you up and after you hear this interview, go back and listen to the first two. So we met Stevan. We first met Stevan back, I don't know how many months ago now, when we were doing a show on lung issues, IPF. And Stevan, in the first interview, talked with us about what it was like to live with IPF and how the disease progressed for him. And then the second interview we talked about what was the transplant experience. So the treatment for him, the only treatment that was available other than some medications was a double lung transplant, 2 lungs transplanted. And he had to do like 9 days of testing, 80 days in the hospital, and had a double lung transplant. And that was 5 years ago. And so we talked about that entire experience. We'll call it an experience. And then we said, you know what, let's do another one talking about what happens after you come back from the transplant center and start to live your life again. So Stevan, welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's so great to finally be back again.
I know we've had some ups and downs. My daughter had been diagnosed with COVID, and so I was a little distracted when it came to the setting up recordings and doing that kind of thing. And Stevan was very patient with me. So Stevan, when last we left off, you'd left the hospital. You'd had a severe infection. And I forget, how many days did you spend in the hospital for that infection?
For the infection, it was 43 days. 43
days. And it's required for the transplant 3 months in Rochester, which is where Stevan had his transplant. So it was three months, and then the 42 days was on top of that, or part of that?
Yeah. I was actually in Rochester for about 5 months.
Wow.
Because I was there for a month waiting for lungs because I couldn't get enough
That's right.
oxygen at home. And then I had to be there for 5 months, and that was after I got out of the hospital. I had to be there for 3 months. I'm sorry, 3. So
Wow.
it went from wearing shorts and T-shirt to December before I finally got to come back home to where I live.
So let's start there. You come back home, and I think a lot of people have either they don't really know what's involved with the transplant, which is why you and I spent a lot of time talking about it, or they kind of have a vague idea. And some people think, okay, I've got any kind of whatever disease I have, I'll go have the transplant, and that's going to cure me. But transplants don't cure, do they, Stevan?
No, they do not. It is a way to extend your life with some quality, and hopefully that is a long time. But everybody's different, and there's always, no matter whenever you're taking medication or get a major surgery like that, it's always a trade-off with side effects and things for getting to return to breathing on your own. It's not a. I know I can only speak for myself. I say that every time. My experiences are mine, and I don't know if anybody else shares them. I think probably some of my experiences are shared by other people. But when I first got out of the hospital, I don't know if it was because of my infection afterwards, that I was in there for so long and had to go through about, 5 or 6 more surgeries after transplant, that it made me so forgetful. Or if everybody gets as forgetful after transplant, I don't know. But it's imperative that you learn how to put your pills into these little daily pill boxes for the week. And I think I started out with about 51 or 52 pills I had to memorize. That was at first. And I'm going to interject here that one of the reasons you have to stay for 3 months close to the hospital is because they're constantly adjusting your medications. And you have to be there to go into the clinic at least 4 or 5 times a week while you're there, so they can keep up with you. And, maybe you get off of this pill, or maybe that one isn't agreeing with you some way, or maybe that one's hard on your kidneys or whatever. So, they have to constantly adjust things. And so I started off with about 51 or 52 pills a day. And I would sit at the dining room table with a book that they gave me where all the pills are written down, what the names of them are, how many to take, at what time of day to take them, at what intervals, because some of them you can't mix together. You have to have 2-hour intervals between them. And it would take me sometimes 6 or 8 hours to fill up the pill box. Yes. Of course, now I can I can do all my pills in about 20 minutes for the whole week, and I don't even have to look at anything. I just know what they are. I know what they're for because I've been doing it so long. But I would get so frustrated. There'd be tears running down my cheeks trying to remember what pills to put where, even when there was a guide right next to me.
Wow.
And I couldn't read. That was one of the problems, was I would read one sentence and forget exact what it said. I'd have to go back and reread that sentence 4 or 5 times. And then
that's
I would have
part of, actually, just for the listeners, that's part of the hospitalization experience. That's part of being in the ICU. There's something called like a post-ICU syndrome. Just the wear and tear of being in a hospital, being, in the bed, the drugs, being on a ventilator, having surgeries, all of that, we think, oh, well, that's really hard on our bodies, but it's also really hard on our minds. And, I can remember after I had an ICU experience, I was in the ICU for a month and trached, and I can remember so clearly, Steven, coming home, and one of the things I love to do is to read. And so I'm off work, because I'm recovering. I couldn't read a book. All I could do was look at pictures in a magazine.
I can relate.
Can you relate to that?
I bought a book while I was in the hospital. That's from the Mayo Clinic. It's oh God, I can see it from here. It's written by a doctor there that it's about how to communicate better, and to get along. And I've had it 5 years now. I still haven't read it because I'm not completely yet. I mean, I'm much, much better than I was 5 years ago. But I'm better at listening now, like a book online or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was very, very tough and very hard to swallow. I mean, because I used to have such a great mind. I mean, memory. I'm sorry, not mind, memory. Mm-hmm. And to go from that to not having a memory at all was like, oh my God, what's happening? What's going on with me? Am I going to be like this forever?
Well, and sort of, the short answer is, in a sense, yes. For me, I learned techniques in terms of writing things down, taking notes, not trusting my memory. I'd always assume in the past, well, I'll remember that. I have to assume now I'm not going to remember it. I might, but I have to assume
Right.
Going to.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because I started out trying to put things into my phone or my iPad so that I could remember them there. But you got to look at it, and I wouldn't remember to do that.
Yeah.
So the information's there, but if you're not paying attention,
right,
it doesn't do much good.
Right. And I do, I do things the old-fashioned way. I have, like a planner that I write things in, because, I can put it in my phone, and then sometimes I can't remember where in the phone it is. But on a piece of paper, I tend to do a little bit better. So, so you have to take a lot of medicine, because your body has to be able to fight rejecting those lungs. So those lungs you can consider them foreign objects in your body. And so if you got a splinter in your body would say, oh, that's a foreign object. I have to get rid of it so it doesn't harm you. So you have to take a lot of medicine. Everyone who has a transplant has to take a lot of medicine to help rejection not happen. So, and that was part of those 52 meds that you took, right? And those medicines, you take them for the rest of your life?
Most of them, yes. Very few of them are maintenance, but most of them are antibiotics for certain areas, like one prevents or tries to prevent, because it's not like a block. It's just one prevents viruses, another one bacteria, another one mold, because all those things can attack you, because I also take 2 other medications that keep my immune system down. So I have to have something in my system all the time to fight those type of things off. And then I also, I inherited I wish I could remember the name of it now, but I inherited something from my donor that from what I was told, about 40% of the people in the United States either get this when they're very young or they're born with it. It's some kind of a virus that's in your lungs, and you don't even know you have it if you get it when you're very young or are born with it. And 60% of the people don't have it. And the only way that you know that or it shows up, the symptoms show up, is that you're getting a transplant and the donor has it and you don't. If neither one of you had it, no problem. If you had it and the donor didn't, no problem. But in my case, I didn't have it, my donor did. So that adds another antibiotic that I have to take twice a day for the rest of my life to keep that virus down that's in the lungs. Other than that, they function beautifully. But so I take, I actually, one of the things that happens after transplant that they told me was going to happen, and I kind of just really didn't pay that close attention to it, was you have to stay out of the sun. Always wear sunscreen every day, even if it's cloudy out. Got to wear a long sleeve shirt, wear gloves whenever, because I ended up getting skin cancer because I didn't pay attention to that part. And when I was in with the dermatologist, he was looking at my chart, and he said, "Wow," he says, "you're taking 5 medications to stay out of the sun." And so that's how many different antibiotics and type of things that I'm taking just to counteract anything that might be trying to invade me with a low immune system.
And that's true in some drugs within oncology. When I worked on oncology and saw patients, there's certain drugs that they take, and every time I saw them, I would give them a lecture about sunscreen, hat, and some people listen, some people don't. But just for our listeners, when your healthcare practitioner is telling you those things, again, keep a notebook, write stuff down. We're not kidding when we say that this is going to make you extra sensitive to the sun and may result in skin cancer.
Yes. One thing that really surprised me that I had no idea was that the dermatologist told me that if you've ever been sunburned in your life, your immune system's been holding that back for you. So
holding
now,
the skin cancer back for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So now it's in your system, and your immune system is lowered to almost nothing. So now all those sunburns come back just like they just happened to you. I didn't realize that.
We can do a show on skin cancer sometime, Stevan, but I think it's like 5 major sunburns before you're, 7 years old tremendously increases your risk of skin cancer.
Right.
And so, there's some of us moms who you have to have your sunscreen on before you go to the beach or before you do anything. And then there's the other moms who oh, they're too young to worry about that. And it's like, sister, no, they're not,
Right.
My kids grew up, with their friends. I'd line them all up. It's like everyone has to have their sunscreen on. And the kids used to call it their sun cream. We have to have our sun cream.
Another thing that he told me too that kind of surprised the heck out of me was that not 50%, but 50 times. He said once you've had a transplant and you're taking all these drugs, you're 50 times more likely to get skin cancer.
Wow.
Not 50%.
So it's a pretty good risk that you're running, and hopefully maybe somebody, Stevan, listening to this will say, "Oh my God, yeah, they did tell me that. I didn't pay much attention to it." Because some people think, "Oh, skin cancer, what's the big deal?" But trust me, it can be life-limiting. It can end your life. So it's not something to be ignored.
That is so true. I ended up getting melanoma on one of my legs, and I caught that myself. I had a mole, as long as I can remember, on my left leg, and one day I was looking at it, and I went, "Wow, does that look different?" And so I looked at it the next day, and I thought, "How could it change overnight?" And I looked at it the third day in a row, and it changed again. It went from just being like a roundish shape to being not round. I mean, it was like spreading out and changing color. So I called Mayo Clinic right away, and I told them about it, and they said, "Well, you need to get down here and get that looked at." So I went the day after. I went within a few days. The whole thing wasn't a week long from the time I noticed it till I went down there, and they did a sample, and it came back as melanoma. And then I had to go back down again for a surgery where they had to take a big chunk of my flesh out to make sure that it hadn't spread anywhere.
Right.
And so far, I haven't had any more melanoma. But then I just went through last summer 5 weeks of topical chemo on my face, where I had like 4 or 5 different spots of skin cancer that had been frozen off about 4 times previous, and it just kept coming back, and it kept coming back worse. So I had to do this topical chemo twice a day for 3 weeks, and then 2 additional weeks to stay completely out of the sun. So 5 weeks out of the sun, 3 weeks of it on. And wow, it just cleaned it up. I mean, I haven't had any issues since. So.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yes,
so
but I mean, still that, Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, what was it like when you got back home? I mean, was it back to normal, or did things change for you and your family?
Well, one of the other things that was really difficult to adjust to was when I was in the hospital that long, they had to teach me how to walk again. I couldn't walk. I mean, it felt like my feet were in concrete. And it took a long time to get over that. And also, we were renting a place down there that had 6 stairs to get into the house, and I couldn't walk up. I couldn't lift my feet to get up the stairs, so I'd have to have somebody in front of me and somebody behind me helping me get up and down the stairs every time I went in or out.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, there's things that happen, Now, once we got home, my wonderful kids, they were so great about wearing masks. My wife had put sanitizer wipes and sanitizer lotion on every counter at every turn, so every time, and everything had to be completely sanitized, because at the beginning you're very, very susceptible to getting something at the very beginning. From what I understand now, and I believe that, as time goes on, it's still there, but it's not as bad as it is at first. So, yeah, my kids were, they were very good about always sanitizing their hands, and whenever we had something to eat, I had to be the first one to dish up so nobody else breathed on the food or sneezed on the food, anything like that. You have to take a lot of precautions. You have to get a new toothbrush, a new razor, and sanitize all those things. Even fingernail clippers, anything like that, you got to sanitize that all the time. So there's a lot of things to keep you occupied, just remembering how to stay clean and learning, about diet and watching leftovers and making sure everything's cooked thoroughly, and that's a lot of stuff that goes on. But I still remember all of it, and I still use it. It's not like there comes a day where you can go, oh, I don't have to worry about that being 165 degrees in the middle anymore. No, that's always like that. If I go to get a egg out of the refrigerator, I look at the date, and make sure that it's not expired. You just have to do that because, and I can't even have eggs like I used to like them with the yolk kind of just a little bit runny. They have to be thoroughly cooked. You have to have like an omelet or scrambled or whatever. Can't have leftovers for more than 24 hours, and they have to have been put in the fridge immediately when you're done dishing up.
Wow.
It's a lot of things to remember. I've ruined a few meals by cooking something and then turn around 2 hours later and go, oh, I didn't put that away. So Cyrus gets it. And and then when I got home and I was able to function and move around, Nancy wanted to drive. I couldn't drive. Well, the 5 months I was down there, I couldn't drive, and then I wasn't supposed to drive for another 3 months after I got home.
Wow.
So so they don't want you getting in an accident or not being used to certain medications or something like that.
Right.
And they're very, very. You have to be very watchful about falling down, because if you were to fall down and like break a bone or say break a bone in your back or something like that, falling backwards down a stair or something, you would not be strong enough to go through that series of another surgery right away.
So how did your wife, or how do you think your wife managed all of these changes within the home? Was that stressful for you guys?
No, I don't believe so. My kids they were pretty darn good kids. They, you don't have to tell them 4 times. And, they realized the situation, and they were pretty good about everything. And, of course, my wife was sanitizing everything up all the time and, very, very good about keeping everything not just clean but sanitized. And, of course, she was working at home. She had a job where she could work from home. So we were all together all the time. It wasn't like she was off working and the kids were off to school. And, in fact, during that transition period is when my kids started taking the school bus every morning to school and back home in the evening. Prior to all this, I drove them to school and picked them up at the end of the day because I was home. Because my doctor had told me to stop working, So I was able to go take them to school in the morning and pick them up. And so that was a big transition for them. All of a sudden they have to start riding the bus all the time, And instead of getting to school in 15 minutes, it might take them 45 minutes,
Yeah.
And, so, they were just wonderful, really.
Well, that's great to have that support. And I know that people going through a transplant have to have their support person who's going to be with them on that entire journey. And for many people, they don't have somebody like that, and that can really can keep them from getting a transplant. So this little window, if you will, into what it's like to get a transplant and what that, I don't want to call it the afterlife, but after the transplant life is like, is really, really helpful to our listeners, Stevan, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Do you have any, one final thought that you want to make sure that people know about?
Well, yes, having that caretaker is extremely important because, with your memory gone and being unstable, you really have to have somebody there all the time for quite a long time to help and make sure, that you're going to be okay.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Unlike sand through an hourglass, sand in your pants is not so smooth. This is Charlie Navarrete, and in the words of French writer and avant-garde filmmaker Jean Cocteau, since the day of my birth, my death began its walk. It is walking toward me without hurrying.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember to keep the chicken gizzards handy to ward off those evil spirits, and every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.